Hello, I'm Eric Smith. Welcome again to People and Politics. You'll see it on television. You'll see it on YouTube. Glad to have you with us. I ran for Congress last year, and it appeared that my chances were about as good as General Custer at Little Bighorn. So I withdrew and decided my time would best be spent doing something great for Jacksonville, to reboot, to reconnect Cuba and Jacksonville. And in that, with that in mind, we're going to head to Cuba later in the year and lead a small delegation of private people, a few former politicians like myself. I was president of the Florida League of Cities, president of the City Council, in the legislature. And we're going to have a good representation of business people and people like our guest today, who is very excited about going back to Cuba. So today, we're going to talk with one of my favorite people on the planet, Betsy Lovett, a lady who has done so much for Jacksonville in so many ways, has been a donor to so many wonderful causes, and she and her family have been here for, well, since before I was born. And so Betsy Lovett, welcome to People and Politics.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, I'm honored that we could get you here and that you would waive your customary honorarium.
Oh,
but
anything for you in this project, because I think it's extraordinarily exciting to our city.
Well, we're excited that you're going to go with us to Cuba to perhaps meet even some of the people that you knew there way back when. I think your family, you and your late husband Billy, had an important business connection with Cuba back in I think the late 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. How about sharing a little bit with us about you and Billy and the Lovett steamship lines?
Well, Billy and I were married in '50, so this was not until '53. He went back, we went to Boston so he could get his Harvard Law degree, just really mainly for business projects, and it's very vital in steamshipping and all sorts of things. Anyway, in 1953, he had his law degree, and we went down to Havana to be there for, really it ended up 3 years off and on. He was there a great deal of the time, but he still of course came back, and we had a child, and therefore I couldn't stay all the time. But anyway, it was an amazing experience. Billy's father had been in the shipping business and with tankers and freighters, and there was, of course, the container load that had never been, the ships that carried the loaded containers. It really had not been organized at that time. There were smaller ships and freighters, and I remember Mr. Lovett describing how the freighters would go over with the arm of the pickup off the territory, lift up, go into the hold of the ship, unload. Somebody had to take it apart, then tie it back up, and this went on. He said that just drove him crazy. There must be a faster way. So he had worked at one point with the railroad company, and he figured that he could load the freight trains with all the parcels of whatever they were sending to Cuba, and build tracks, open up the bow of one of his ships, lay train track all in there, and check on doing a second. That was all an experimental thing then, because he really didn't know the heaviness of the freight cars and what it would take. They may have just had. But anyway, there were tracks all in there, and he built the round. He built first the harbor in Port Everglades, and then he built one in Havana. He built the round in front of the docking where they would back, the train would go in and then back the whole loaded cars right onto the train, lift the lines and let the ship sail to Cuba. And there it had the same process. The trains would come in. And this was really the beginning of the container loads. Now, of course, Crowley is marvelous. They stack them up on the on the deck of the ship, and it's huge and it carries so many. But that was our first experience in Cuba, and Batista at that time was leading Cuba. It was not until the 26th day of July in '56 when all the actions really broke out. We can discuss that now or whatever you think, but it really was
Indeed,
wonderful.
we will discuss that.
It really was a wonderful experience, and we were there for 3 years, as I said, and Billy saw this thing develop into really an amazing, it wasn't, he still had work here in Jacksonville that he had to come down back from Cuba, and of course I came home some too, but staying in Cuba was such an exciting, it was such a glamorous spot. It was so beautiful. I still sometimes feel, and I know I've never been back, and Billy never went back, but I know we used to talk and say, of all the places we've been, I mean, I've been blessed. He traveled a lot, and I had the experiences of going with him many, many places around the world. And we always felt it was one of the most glamorous, beautiful ones at that time that we had ever really seen. The people were gorgeous, friendly,
And did you have a house down there, or where did you stay?
We
when you
actually
and Debbie were
had
there?
sort of a suite at the National Hotel because I didn't stay all that much. I'd stay 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, go home. My mother was a gem because I had a marvelous woman that helped around the house and did the cooking. So Mother and the gal stayed there I had one daughter at the time. And naturally we missed her horribly, but this was such a boon to the industry, to the shipping industry, to Cuba, to that whole area of many islands, and to Jacksonville.
How do you think Jacksonville benefited from that trade, and do you suppose other businesses other than Lovett steamship lines in Jacksonville
I'm not actually sure how much Jacksonville benefited, because at that particular time, the shipyards and the loading areas on and off were more or less in the city. So you had a 24 or 26 mile run to the ocean before you could, and all of that takes time. I mean, it's just like any business. You monitor your hours, your time, you do it as fast as you can. So actually, that I think is why they really put the container load, the train lines out of Port Everglades, because it was directly then to Cuba.
But you know, the statistic that we have, Betsy, is that 90% of all the shipping between Cuba and the United States came through the Port of Jacksonville in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a number you're familiar with?
I've heard that.
Yeah.
And I really, and I'm probably sure at one point I could have told you, but I'm afraid I've forgotten some of those things that I should have stored in my head.
That's fair. It's not important what you forget. It's important how much you remember, which is why we have you here to talk today.
Well, I was just really privileged at a time when Cuba was sort of shining, and there were so many wonderful people, business people, leaders and wonderful people visiting all the time, these nice Cuban people. The houses were gorgeous, the parties were, there were many, many parties, and we were privileged because this was a new business and it was opening a new area in Cuba. So we were very privileged to be included in many gatherings. There were beautiful, I would say, nightclubs. There was one that just really, I don't know that I've ever sort of seen one quite like it. There were cocktail bars, the Floridita, which featured Hemingway's Frozen Daiquiri. And then, of course, I always love to think about Hemingway living in a beautifully built, elegant, extraordinary neighborhood where the houses were divine and huge and the people were lovely, and all of the men. It was a time when men had sort of, I don't know whether I should even talk about it, but had girlfriends. It was a tradition. And they had the beautiful wives in these houses, and then the girlfriends were kept somewhere nearby. But we used to call it, for fun, Tobacco Road, because it was so elegant that we named it the Extreme, after the book, The Tobacco Road.
Well, you know, if I was Anthony Bourdain, I'd be talking about the food. What can you tell us as you're kind of a gourmet kind of person?
Well, no,
about
I'm
the
not
food.
really like I should be. And I wish I had learned more. I should have, had I been smarter at the time, I should have taken courses. The food was always marvelous, and I never remember anything like so many people think of the Spanish and the islands, pizzas. I don't ever remember having a pizza down there. But there were a lot of foreign things, of course, brought in. And I mean, they had caviar when we really didn't have much caviar here. They had, because it was shipped in from Europe, and so many people traveled around the world and went to Cuba and went to the islands and brought things. But it was pastas and fruit, and of course the cane fields were beautiful and provided so much work for the people, as well as cane syrup and all of those things. So, and desserts, well, as they would be in any fancy restaurant today. The service was lovely. And I just, I presume it's just all gone now, which is a shame, but that can be built back up. That's something people can do.
People to people.
People to people.
Like we're trying to do with
Yes.
the mission to Cuba.
And it doesn't take that much push or drive. But it's so rewarding. And if you get it this sort of steamed up and going, it'll grow by leaps and bounds, because everybody in the world is going to want to go to Cuba. I was always distressed. I was on a board in Venice, Italy for 20 years, and it was a restoration board and very high-powered, and there were high-powered people from all over Europe on that board. And so many of them went to Cuba frequently. They could. The Europeans always could. They'd say, Betsy, come on and go. Well, I was on a blacklist, and that was part of my, of being put out of Cuba, and because of the train ferry, the container load, whatever they wanted to call it, because I was married to Billy, and Billy was not allowed, and I was put on the blacklist, and that blacklist was just eliminated about 5 years ago, because but the Europeans would always say, Betsy, come on and let's go to Cuba. I couldn't. I was not allowed. I'd have been picked up and housed in something behind bars.
Well, isn't it wonderful that they finally realized what an extraordinary person you are, and that you would be an asset as a tourist, as opposed to somebody with bad motive.
Oh, mercy, I don't know about that. But that really, the reason that took place was after Mr. Lovett really he sold a lot of the land and whatever to Batista, and what they ever did with it, I never heard. And of course, it was confiscated under Castro. But Mr. Lovett, for a few years after that, kept a ship 40 miles, which is the center part between Miami or the Keys and Cuba and Havana. And anyone that wanted to come to the States was allowed to slip out, hoping they would not get picked up. And they would he allowed anyone to come and get on the ship, and he brought them to this country. And of course, they did have to go through immigration. They weren't just they were nice people. These were people that really were business people that needed to get out because their lives were going to be ruined completely, as the others were.
The government taking their property
Taking
and so
over,
on.
confiscating everything.
Well, speaking of property, your family, you and Billy and Billy's father, Mr. Lovett, had property that was confiscated. If Billy was still with us, do you think he would want to go down there? Would
He'd
he?
be on the next boat or plane or whatever's going. He always
That's pretty
said,
clear.
I'd be right with him too. He always said, and he traveled. Oh, I mean, we lived in Ecuador 3 years, and right after Cuba, because he was running a banana plant, 25,000-acre banana plantation for his father, and he had to be down there. The manager messed up, and so his daddy sent him down to run it. And but he traveled all over. We were in India and Pakistan and in Africa and all kinds of places. But he always said Cuba was one of the most beautiful places in the world. He would give anything to go back. He loved it. He really loved it. He loved the people because they were fun and they were happy and they were beautiful. And I don't mean just these upper class people. The people on the street were fun. They smiled, they laughed, you know, and it was just it was a whole happy venture.
Do you think anybody else in Jacksonville spent a lot of time down there that you knew? I know you mentioned to me one time something about the newlyweds. And,
oh yes, around the country. Excuse me. There was a steamship line called the P&O, Pacific and Orient and Pacific, but it was the P&O. And honeymooners from around the country would fly in and get on. My mother went, not as a bride, but after that, a few years after they were married, my mother and father went, and she loved it. The thing is, so many of those people have sort of passed the age limit at this point. I know there would have been many that would have come and braved, but not many of them are with us anymore, which is a shame.
Betsy, let's get into current events. Governor Rick Scott recently said that any seaport in Florida that did any business with Cuba or had a memorandum of understanding like Palm Beach County's port and maybe Pensacola and Tampa, he'd do everything in his power to take away their funding because of the brutal dictator there. It occurs to me that there's something pretty close to that in China and in Vietnam, and we do business with those countries. And the theory being that if you engage with them, if they find out more about Americans, they'll open up and gradually evolve into, if not a democracy, at least something more free and fair and human. What's your take on that? Well, should we be re-engaging with Cuba?
I can't see why in the world we shouldn't. There are human beings there, and their lives should be exposed to what and they could learn and they could travel and they could work. Why not? We do. I don't think we can open our ports just to let every random creature in. I do think they have to go through the immigration processes.
Of course, yeah.
Completely, because that's very important to all of us.
But here's one of the concerns. Our seaport, Jacksport,
right,
is the only one in the state of Florida, except perhaps Miami for some similar issues, that's not engaging with Cuba. Pensacola recently went, had a delegation that went to Cuba.
I saw that. I mean,
Tampa has done that. United States Representative Kathy Castor led that group. Orlando. I'm sure the New Orleans,
yeah, and
Brunswick,
people from
all these
all over the
competing
country
ports.
flying JetBlue, and the cruise ships are going to be going in, and all of these things. No, I think we've got to get on the bandwagon. I really do. It's important. We're a big port. We're a strong, wonderful group of people, and they need help. And I think they would come. I mean, I think particularly the young people, they could just open their lives up if they get an exposure to something like Jacksonville and what we have here to offer. And I just think whatever we can do, wherever the strongholds are to help us, we should energize them.
Interestingly, the Cuban port officials are planning a visit to Florida. They're going to visit with Palm Beach. I can't remember all of them. Palm Beach, Tampa, probably Pensacola, and several other ports.
And not Jacksonville.
But not Jacksonville.
Why? Has there been any talk against it? I haven't seen it or read it.
You know,
you just know it hadn't
the
happened.
governor's threatened all of these ports, including ours.
Well, then,
but I think ours,
somebody has got to, I would say, get to him, and I don't know who that is because that's not right. That's too controlling. I think.
Indeed.
Indeed, I think we don't want control like that. We should be able to expand to the limits of what we know are clean, fair, and honest.
Yeah, I can see the port side here too, because they're trying to get money for various projects, and some of that still hasn't been explained enough or debated enough about the environmental impacts on the river. But that's their take. So they're not going. But one more reason why we're going. We're going down there. We're probably going to talk to them about a baseball game between the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp and the
Wouldn't
Cuban
that
team.
be something?
Oh, yeah, I think
I think we would have a delegation, royal from Cuba coming up.
And
something
we're going
like that.
to talk to their port officials.
Yes.
And tell them that we don't represent our port, but we own it. And we definitely own it, and we're going to talk to some business people about information technology, and we're going to try to find some of your former friends down there.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Wouldn't that? If you got
it
the
would
names,
be amazing.
We might be able
the
to
only
look them
trouble
up.
is, as I say, I've been young so long that some of my former friends are young like I am, and they're ready to. As I say, we're beginning to fade.
Yeah, well,
but I'm not going
as you
to
like
until
to say, I'm not old. I've just been young a whole lot longer
I've just been young longer than the rest of you all. I never say I'm old because I don't feel that way. But
I've seen you. You're the Energizer Bunny, Betsy.
Well,
you
honey,
really
I hope the battery doesn't run down.
There you go.
And I'll be slowed up. But no, I'm blessed to have a lot of that. On the other hand, there is so much that should be done. And I just hope Jacksonville, and I hope the officials think about it, look into it, and let's get moving on it. We're going to have a deeper river. We're going to have all those things. I'm not quite sure myself when all this could take place, but nevertheless, we've got to do something.
Yes, we do. And so many people in Jacksonville are interacting with Cuba. I've met so many who've gone down there all by themselves. My good friend George Register, who's a master engineer, builds state-of-the-art docks and so on.
Absolutely.
They were invited down there to look at I think maybe one of the docks at the Port of Mariel. Correct me if I'm wrong, George. But and there are people that have been down there selling lumber, like Mike Lanahan. That's legal.
It's legal.
It's legal to sell anything related to wood products.
And it's going to become more open and more legal. It's just got to. And I just feel like it will.
You know, I talked to my good friend Al Fox, who's going to lead our delegation down there. He's led dozens of them.
That's wonderful.
Including the Pensacola, the one from Tampa.
Has he already done all of those? The ones that have gone?
Already.
And he led the. Oh, that's marvelous.
Yeah,
we got to get him.
Yeah, and he speaks fluent Spanish.
Yes.
And I met with him in the Columbia restaurant, and I said, Al.
Oh, that is so wonderful.
Down in Tampa. I drove down to Tampa to meet Al.
That is so wonderful.
And I said, Al, level with me. said, have we got a chance to go to Cuba and get anything done? I said, definitely. I said, well, is Trump going to undo all that? He says he really can't. The genie's already out of the bottle. Too many of his friends own airlines.
They are
the airlines
going.
are flying and
They
the
are
ships and all that.
going. I know
And,
it. The cruise ships are going. I think one has already been.
Yeah, I asked him also, I said, Al, is President Trump going to drain the swamp? He said, well, I really don't know how he's going to do that because he's appointed all the alligators. So, to his cabinet.
That is
that a hoot or is that a hoot?
is amazing. I saw that.
Well, Betsy, you know, you and I can talk for hours and hours and hours.
Well, I want to just say one thing. I think we got to go down there with groups and encourage groups, because that nightclub called the Tropicana had open ceilings. You could look to heaven, and glass and mirrors everywhere, and inside were trees and plants growing. It was just an amazing spot. Gorgeous music, dancing, and then, well, I mean, the lounges, the Zaragoza and the Floridita. I have the little book from the cocktail lounge, because it was all a cocktail
Betsy,
lounge.
we're going to talk more about this later. Because
Okay, good.
This is
it.
A wrap
You see,
for this time.
open my mouth,
Thank you.
darling, and it doesn't close.
Thank you for being with us, and that's our good luck. Thank you.
Cheers,
Yeah,
and to all your
yes,
successes.
Thank you. And for people in politics, I'm Eric Smith. Our guest today was Betsy Lovett, the amazing, unsinkable Betsy Lovett, and we're just so proud to have her, and hope everything goes well for you this year. See you soon. God bless.